Barron v. Baltimore represented only one relatively minor kind of federalism problem regarding individual rights. The real tinderbox was slavery. As we noted when we first read the entire text of the Constitution, the 1789 Constitution contained a number of uneasy compromises that allowed black slavery to continue based on state law. Even at the outset, this situation was unstable because of the problem of runaway slaves. In 1789, state law in 5 states banned slavery, while slavery was legal in 8 states. What would happen if a slave escaped into a free state? Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution required runaway slaves or indentured servants to be returned on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. As the nation began expanding west, the balance of slave and free states began to shift, creating severe political tensions and violence over whether newly admitted states should be slave or free. Meanwhile, northern free states were slow to enact procedures under which southern slave owners could enforce the Constitution's runaway slave clause, while slave catchers roamed through cities and towns in northern states looking for runaways or others to kidnap and export south into enslavement. Northern abolitionists sought to highlight the inequities of slavery and of the fugitive slave laws by sponsoring lawsuits by slaves and fugitives in northern territories seeking their freedom. Dred Scott v. Sanford, which reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 1857, was one such case. Justice Taney's majority opinion in Dred Scott is regarded as perhaps the worst judicial opinion in American history. Scott was born a slave around 1795 in Virginia. He was owned by Peter Blow, who was part of a family with substantial land holdings in Virginia, and who had served as a captain in the U.S. Army in the War of 1812. Peter Blow and his wife Elizabeth moved to Alabama in 1818 and then to St. Louis, Missouri in 1830, where they ran a hotel. St. Louis sat at the fault line of the debates between slave and free states. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 admitted Missouri to the Union as a slave state, but prohibited slavery in all states north of Missouri's southern border. A further compromise in 1850 allowed California to be admitted as a free state, left the status of the Utah Territory north of the Missouri Compromise line up to a popular vote, and created a stronger federal Fugitive Slave Act. Elizabeth Blow died in 1831 and Peter died in 1832. Either just before Peter Blow's death or as part of his estate, ownership of Dred Scott transferred to John Emerson, a doctor in the U.S. Army. Scott accompanied Emerson to a posting in Illinois, a free state, in 1833, where he lived until 1836, when Emerson brought Scott with him to a posting at Fort Snelling in the Wisconsin Territory, a free territory in an area that is now part of Minnesota. While there, Scott married Harriet Robinson, a slave owned by Lawrence Taliaferro, another Army officer. Taliaferro, who was also a justice of the peace, presided over a civil wedding ceremony for Scott and Robinson. In 1837, Emerson was transferred to the Jefferson Barracks, a military base along the Mississippi River south of St. Louis. Emerson left Scott behind and leased him out as a servant to other military officers, a common practice with household slaves. Emerson was then transferred to Fort Jessup in Louisiana, where he married Eliza Irene Sanford in 1838. Emerson and his new wife summoned Scott to Louisiana. Dred and Harriet Scott made the journey to Louisiana along the Mississippi River. Along the way, on a steamboat in free territory, Harriet gave birth to a daughter, Lizzie. Lizzie's birth in free territory meant that she was legally free. In 1840, Dr. Emerson was reassigned to Fort Snelling, and the Scotts moved with the Emersons to St. Louis. While Dr. Emerson was away on military duties in the Seminole War, his wife Irene hired the Scotts out. In 1843, Dr. Emerson died while away on duty in the Iowa Territory, leaving his estate, including the Scotts, to Irene. Irene continued to hire the Scotts out over the next 3 years. In 1836, Scott attempted to purchase his family's freedom from Irene, but she refused. With the help and advice of some abolitionist activists and others, Scott sued for his freedom. Remarkably, some of the people who helped finance Scott's case included the children of Peter Blow, his daughter Charlotte Blow Corliss, and his son Henry Taylor Blow. Henry Blow was an abolitionist who later served as U.S. Minister to Venezuela, a U.S. Congressman, and U.S. Ambassador to Brazil. In his majority opinion, Justice Taney held that enslaved blacks are not citizens under the Constitution. He concluded that the Declaration of Independence's statement that all men are created equal was not meant to encompass the enslaved African race. He noted that the slave trade and fugitive slave clauses in the Constitution point directly and specifically to the Negro race as a separate class of persons and showed clearly that they were not regarded as a portion of the people or citizens of the government then formed. And he held the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. On the one hand, it's obvious why this opinion is considered one of the very worst Supreme Court decisions in our history. From another perspective, although we may think Taney's opinion was morally opprobrious, it may well have been correct from an originalist perspective. That is, the 1789 Constitution arguably did intend what Taney suggested, particularly concerning the Fugitive Slave Clause. You should note here that there is conflicting scholarship on whether Taney really did capture the original meaning of the 1789 Constitution and about precisely what the framers meant by the compromises that document contained. In any event, far from stabilizing the Missouri Compromise or otherwise settling ongoing disputes about Northern cooperation with fugitive slave laws, the Dred Scott decision further destabilized the nation and arguably helped precipitate the Civil War.